what we realize we're doing is creating possibilities. That's what we're doing. People say we're creating young entrepreneurs. That is true. That's the mechanical term for it. But actually, we're unlocking their potential, which creates possibilities, right? Because we know talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. And I've always said that if you can't access opportunity, you should be able to create your own opportunity.
Mix and match it.
So do you publish weekly or?
Weekly, yeah, weekly.
Cool.
But this month I haven't published though.
Okay.
Just this month because this space was taken forever. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you had a similar kind of thing when you moved into your space. It
was a nightmare.
Space. And then things like
it's a lot of work.
Things take a lot longer than you think. And with this place, the issues, I was ordering stuff and then I found I've ordered the wrong adapter that I've got to send this adapter back. Right. From Japan and then
Right. No, it was a headache. Setting up that space took us. So we were in there in September, October, and we didn't open till March. But it's a 6,500 square foot space. There's like 50 desks in there. So it took a lot of time to get, because we had to refurb it, put down new floors, paint. There was a lot of work to be done. So I hear you. It's not an easy thing.
So were you still paying for the space or do you have a grace period?
No. So it's in partnership with Brent Council. So Brent Council are they're paying for everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it's part of their 10-year digital transformation plan.
Perfect. Yeah.
Myself and then another entrepreneur called Cess Richards, who runs a platform called Slinky, basically convinced them that there are, we just stated the truth, that there's barriers for diverse entrepreneurs looking to get into tech. There's just a bunch of barriers in front of them. And if we could use this space to remove one of the barriers, which is having a physical space, then that'll move the needle on some of these issues. And they agreed. So
it's quite interesting actually because you got that tech background, but then most people are going to know you for the education, like the Ultra.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
Because when I was looking into it, I was like, you got tech startups, proper tech background.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It comes out because it's funny. I was on I'm in a leadership group with some other founders, and we had our kind of peer-to-peer learning thing. Might have been beginning of the week. And then one of the founders had a problem. They had some kind of problem. And then when they asked me what my opinion on what the fix was, after I gave it, they said, you speak like a marketer. What's your background? And I said, I used to run a digital agency. And they were like, it makes sense because like the way you speak, the way you spoke about it, about what you were going to do or about what he should do, didn't sound like education. It sounded like you've got another, feather to your cap. So it comes out like the fact that we're strong on that we've got a strong social media following. There's a number of things which, when people realise what my background is, it makes sense what I do now. Like the way in which we do what we do now, it makes sense because of my background. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
But you're right. Otherwise, people, it kind of, it might sound strange to people, but it's also the reason why, we've been successful because I'm using past experiences like everyone else does. Do you know what I mean?
It's quite interesting actually because with me as well, my background's pretty diverse in a sense because I used to work in fashion.
I remember you saying, yeah.
And then I went into finance and then doing this more creative work. Like there's all sorts of different threads and people be like, what the hell are you doing that?
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, that's right.
But to me, it makes perfect sense because to me, there's a thread. The thread behind most of the things I've been involved in anyway has been that social impact thread. So when I was in fashion, there was a social impact thread because I run the business and it was a sustainable business and we had goals about taking the manufacturing back over to Africa and empowering some of the smallholder people over there. And that was the plan and the goal. And I only went into it, not because, I like creative anyway. I love creative things. But I went into it because I was looking for something to do and reading about where the problems are. And then found out about how mad the fashion industry is and the toxins and the human slave labor. Like, it's crazy. And I was reading about that. And then, I don't know if you remember, in Bangladesh in 2011, I think it was, the Rana Plaza factory collapse, over 1,000 people died. Yeah. That one was obviously big and hit the news and that, but then there's mad stuff in this industry and the pollutants messing up people's ecosystem. I was like, this is mad. We got to do something.
Yeah, it's very mad. It's very mad. I mean, I guess unlike you, I'm in social impact now, but nothing I did before that was to do with social impact. I literally, the social impact thing was just like went from 0 to 100 overnight.
What happened?
So there was never an impact thread, even when to the point where when we first started Ultra Education, we weren't a social enterprise deliberately, but the work we did was creating impact, and I didn't even know. Someone had to tell me. I remember the day someone said to me, "Do you realise your work is creating social impact?" I said, "What is that?" I didn't even know what the term meant. What's social impact? Oh, because of this, that, and the next. I was like, oh, okay, I had no idea. So it was a complete accident.
Then what happened? You know what? Yeah, at the Virgin event. So I might be butchering it a little bit. Yeah, but I remember in your pitch you said something about you answered your call, or you had a calling, and you answered something around a calling. Or
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's why. So the kind of genesis of Ultra was that I always say to people, coming from the background I was in, so finance, tech, and all the rest of it. If someone had told me back then I'd be running a kids' education business, I'd be like, why would I want to do that? I'd be like, what? Who wants to work with kids and then, creating social impact and being socially, who wants to do that? Do you know what I mean? So, but I had a growing compulsion to solve the problem. And it just so happened that my experience and my lived experience was perfectly placed to solve the problem. It's like I was made for it. It's like I was made specifically to solve this problem.
But a growing compulsion from where? Like, is it because of your own children?
Because of my own children, because of what I saw out in the world of entrepreneurship, and when I would go and speak at schools and colleges, and I could see the problems there. So there were a number of different facets that pointed towards the problem, highlighted the fact that what I was doing was slightly, would be defined as being a bit of an outlier, and then me reconciling that with, well, I shouldn't be an outlier. What I'm doing should be normal. This shouldn't be, it shouldn't be considered as different or special or odd. It shouldn't be considered that.
What you mean, as in like the social impact side of your work shouldn't be?
No. I mean, before I started Ultra Education, I published like 3 best-selling books. There was no one in my circle that was doing that. Like back now, loads of people are putting out books, but back in 2010, no one was doing that. I'd spoken by 2015, I'd spoken in like 15 different countries on entrepreneurship and tech. And I guess what it was, and even a friend of mine who I grew up with, we were at a mutual friend, stag do, and he said to me, "You've done well considering you're from Harlesden." And he meant it as a compliment, but I thought, wow, like, is that how the world sees it? Considering you're from this point, you've done well. When actually, the people who were in my professional peer group, nobody would say that to them. No one would say to a white male who did what I did, "You've done well considering." They wouldn't say that to them. So I just thought, nah, that can't be right. And then when I would go into schools in my area, that in the borough that I was born in, Brent, and I would talk about what I've done, the kids would be like, "And you're from Brent?" They wouldn't believe, they'd be stunned to hear that I grew up in the same area as them, right? So I thought, okay, nah, this problem needs to be solved. And it was that started to grow, like the whole idea of, okay, it became annoying to me, number one. And number two, I thought, well, that experience is okay for me, but what about the next generation of entrepreneurs? Are they going to have a set of lucky accidental incidences that will get them to the point where I have? And you can't engineer that. That's not a route. That's not a framework. It's not a blueprint. My journey, I could say, there was accident upon accident upon accident. You pull that together and here I am. And I thought, something should be available to children and young people to deliberately create that journey. Because if you go into the world of private and boarding schools, that journey is deliberate.
Yeah.
It's deliberate from prep school, right? So they go to prep school, right? From the time they're like 5-6 years old, they're in prep school, and it's prepping them to go to, so prep school would be private. It's prepping them to get into a private junior school, which is prepping them to get into a private secondary or boarding school, which is prepping them to get into a Russell Group university, which is prepping them to enter into the market at 40 grand a year. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That is up from there.
All of that. So from 5 years old, their journey, that trajectory is planned. It's completely deliberate. It doesn't happen by accident, right? But for a statistic or a demographic like me, that's not planned. It's, most, I would say, minority entrepreneurs who've made it would say that it was not deliberate. They worked hard and, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But the journey wasn't like, it was fraught with difficulties. It wasn't an easy thing, right? And there had to be some breakthrough moments to get them to where they are.
Yeah.
And I just thought, nah, because it's just not fair. It's not fair that the fact we have a failing education system, the fact we have a poorly structured careers progression pathway for young people, the fact we have low aspirations for them, the fact we deem them disadvantaged, I was like, nah.
But then when you talk about the poorly planned career progression and the aspiration section, that's for young people from a certain background. Because like I said, the ones that go from particular backgrounds, go to prep schools and whatnot, they don't face those same kind of challenges. So
there are approximately 10,000 private and boarding schools in the UK, and there are 25,000 state schools. So therefore, the majority of children and young people in this country do not have that deliberately planned or intentional route to a successful career. They just don't have it. It doesn't exist for them, right? So now we have language like structural inequalities and bias, and we have this language now, this newly found language post BLM. But we knew that we've known this for decades, right? There are documentaries from the 70s and 80s which talk about the level of poverty within Black and minoritized communities and the lack of educational provision and the gaps in employment. That's like 50 years ago. Do you know what I mean? That's as old as me, right?
Yeah.
And you look at it, you think, wow, it's still happening. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I'm saying that compulsion level grew in me, and I was now no longer solely motivated by money, because I've been in investment banking, and I wasn't making millions, but I made enough to know that money doesn't make you happy, that money doesn't make you feel better about yourself. It's momentary. You can have a nice holiday, you could buy yourself a watch, whatever. But all of that, if you've driven in a Ferrari, you will realize how underwhelming it is. It's not life-changing, right? But as a young man, in a kind of masculine setting, the idea is Rolex, Ferrari, all this kind of stuff, right? If you put a Rolex on your wrist, you're like, for me, I'm like, okay, so what? Right? What does that support? What does that mean? It's a signaling thing, right? You drive a Ferrari, you're like, okay, but so what? Do you know what I mean? It's like, there's only so many nice clothes you can wear. There's only, at some point, and this, I think, typically happens with people who have highly successful careers. It's the reason why you see a lot of them at a point want to give back. That whole, I want to give back. Because you realise that material things are meaningless. Your title in your workplace is meaningless. It doesn't fulfil the promise that you were given as a young person, that you get a good job, make money, you'll be happy. Yeah. It's not true.
That promise, when I was in secondary school, because in my school, there was, I don't know, I feel like it's like this in a lot of schools where you got a select few teachers who are really for the students, and then a lot of teachers it's a job. They're just doing their job. Cool, whatever. But there was a couple that were really, you could tell they really had a heart for the children. And there was one teacher, he come really late. I must have been like 10 or something like that. And he came as a deputy head. And he came and changed the whole school.
Okay.
So he came, he changed the uniform, he made us, well, our year campaigned against it, but the rest of the years, the younger ones, they started wearing blazers and stuff. We used to walk around with our ties like short and fat. We used to
Right. Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah.
He used to kind of stop us in the playground and
Right.
take a tap and tie up. He would make sure you put it on properly. He used to
Wow.
dress you like short out your blazer. He had he
dope.
really wanted us to look proper. And he was a geography teacher as well. And in the lessons, he'll teach us the curriculum and that kind of thing. But he used to always go off on tangents. He will stop, he'll get up here and then sit down on the edge of a table in front of you, like, guys, and just talk about life. But he done it all the time, yeah. I remember him once, and he points back to what you said about people thinking that you get these things, you get to a stage in the future, and then you haven't necessarily been the promise that you were given as a child that do this, do that, you're going to achieve happiness. That hasn't necessarily happened. And he told us that in school. He was like, you feel like, I know a lot of you guys, you feel that you come here, you get your GCSEs, you go to uni, you whatever, you graduate, you get a job, and then you're happy and life is done. And then from there, just plain saying it, he was like, nah.
Yeah.
He said, trust me, I'm telling you right now, that's when life starts.
Right.
This is the easy part.
Right.
Just get through it. But it never registered. And so as I've got older, and I look back at the man, yeah, and I don't even know if he'll remember me like that. I didn't have a relationship with him like that. He was just a teacher there, but you can tell he had a heart for the children. And when I look back, I'm like, this guy was sick. He was a good teacher, and you don't come across many people like that. But actually, yeah, that promise that we're told, do this, do this, do that, and life is set, isn't reality at all. At all. There's so much more to it. When you talk about the people, you get to a certain stage in your career and your life and whatnot, and then everybody wants to give back, because I think it points to something deeper where you start to realize over time, maybe not even consciously, but on a subconscious level, you start to realize you can buy more, you can do this, you can do that, you can gather way more material items, but to what avail? And afterwards, you start to, you need something deeper, like a deeper purpose, and people start to search for that. And I guess it sounds like you kind of went on that journey, working in investment banking and running businesses and whatnot, and then over time interacting with some young people and whatnot, you're like, nah, man, I gotta do something else.
I guess the journey wasn't deliberate though. The journey towards where I am now with Ultra was not deliberate at all. So I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just failed so many times that I just ended up getting a job. My entrepreneurial skills meant that without a degree, I could have a career in investment banking because I could pick up things really quickly. I was confident. I interviewed well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what had happened was I fell into the promise that entrepreneurs are given, meaning if you are a successful entrepreneur, you have a successful business, you have a best-selling book, you get up and you speak in front of thousands of people, that you'll be happy. That as a successful entrepreneur, it will give you a degree of fulfillment, happiness. And I had achieved a number of those things, but something was still missing. And that's when there was, I call it a growing compulsion. There was a number of things which pointed towards what had gotten me there, because every time I would do something which people would deem as successful, it would always come up that, you're from this background, so set against this background, what you've done is good. It was never good on its own. If I had a best-selling book, it wasn't Julian just had a best-selling book. Julian's had a best-selling book and he's from Harlesden. If I went and spoke on the same stage as a prime minister of a country, it would be, Julian's done that, it's good, but he's from a disadvantaged background, right? So it would almost, for me, the part, and the reason why I say it became annoying is because it felt like I couldn't just be successful on its own. It was always weighed against my background. And the reason, and I can understand from the outside looking in, it's because, and I used to call it the kind of, not me, but the way in which in a microcosm, I used to call it the Lewis Hamilton or Tiger Woods effect, meaning you're not supposed to be there, but you've done well, right? So you're now kind of, what you've done is amplified because of your skin color, because it stands out, you're an outlier, right? So in a microcosm, in my industry, I was doing the same thing. We had what I believe is the first black-owned digital agency in Shoreditch. So at the time, we're talking 2004, 2005, there were 3 black guys on Great Eastern Street we were the only black-owned company in the area. And as we then realized, probably in the UK and probably in Europe, in digital, right, in doing what we were doing, yeah? So, you know, and I made a video recently that when people would engage with us, they would think one of two things. Either we were just hustlers, right, and we didn't know what we were doing, or we were really good, i.e. the Lewis Hamilton and Tiger Woods effect. Yeah. And it just so happened, the three of us loved what we were doing. We loved tech. We loved digital, right? We came from, you know, corporate backgrounds. We had a love for the fast-growing internet space, and we could put those two things together, and we were able to advise businesses, right? And so that gave us an edge. And when I realized that, okay, you can't ignore, right, what makes you stand out. You can't ignore what makes you different. The fact that people would ask you to come and speak at a conference, at a school, at a corporate event, do not be under any illusion that the fact that you are black is one of the reasons why you're being asked to be there. Because in terms of intrigue value, it's like, Julian, go and tell them what you did. Go and tell them about what you do. And I'm thinking, wow, they really like what I do. Nah, the reason they're saying, Julian, tell them what you do is because people will look at it as being different and odd, right? And I would be at networking. I remember I went to a networking event once, right? And, you know, people are standing around, you know, exchanging business cards. And one guy stopped me and he said, I know exactly what you do. I bet you're a personal trainer. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like, this is like the biggest cliche in the world, right? I was either a rapper or like music or something to do with like physical sport. And I said, no, I run a digital marketing agency in Shoreditch. And like, you know, but I said it in a way that kind of made it like a funny joke. But I just thought, wow, like, you know, that's the perception. So if I walk into a room, that's what people are not gonna connect to what I do in any regard, right? And so that's that's now a barrier. That's what we call a barrier, right? And I think you do have really good teachers out there. I know a lot of them. We've worked with many of them, but that's not a system, right? So most people can think back to that really good teacher, right? But it's a little bit like saying you shouldn't have to think about one really good teacher. They should have all been good.
Yeah.
Right? Why is it we can only think about one really good teacher? And it's not because of, and again, being in the education space, I've realized it's not because teachers are bad people or they're incompetent or whatever it might be. It's because if you put a good person into a bad system, you're going to get bad output. It's just as simple as that, which is why so many teachers have been leaving the profession in droves, because they come in with a promise that you can change the lives of children, right? And then you realise that you've got to teach an area of the curriculum that no longer exists in the real world. Yeah. Like, there was a teacher I spoke to, an ex-teacher I spoke to, and he said that there was an area of the curriculum, but it probably still exists, where he had to teach the students about this semiconductor, right? To teach them about electronics. And he said, Julian, the semiconductor no longer exists. It's no longer used in the real world. Right. So he's sitting there thinking, why am I teaching these kids about the semiconductor? He said, I'm out. Yeah. I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore because it's almost like I am complicit in their failure. I'm contributing to them failing in life because I know what I'm teaching them is not going to help them.
So do you see Ultra Education as complementing or maybe filling the gaps that the traditional education system is missing out of our young people?
So the word ultra comes from the old Latin, which means to go beyond. So ultra education means beyond education. And so for me, that kind of states this idea where actually, and you said it, your teacher said it, your education doesn't just happen at school, right? I was in a meeting with a very big educational institution just last week, and they were talking about this idea of lifelong learning. It's not a new term, but for that educational institution, that's quite meaningful to them because they'll have to change everything about the way that they do things, right? We all know, being in the professional world, that when you leave school, like your teacher said, that's the start. In any professional environment, you still have to keep learning stuff. You just do, right? Yeah. You have to keep learning, keep updating your skills. Otherwise, you just won't be relevant, right? And so the problem is young kids and young people don't know that. They just don't. They think their learning will stop at university. That's it. I've learned everything I need to learn. I've studied psychology, so I'm going to go and be a psychologist. That's what they're, because no one tells them any different, right? Yeah. So it's not their fault either. So for me, it was about, okay, how do we make an education ultra? How do we go beyond the confines of what traditional education can provide? And the way in which I did that, because some people do it through sports, some people do it through music, some people do it through things like photography and chess, and you can teach lots of life skills and leadership and teamwork through many different facets, right? The thing that I was credible in and that I knew about was entrepreneurship. And when I look back at my life against the demographic which put me as an outlier and made me this interesting thing to look at under a microscope, go on, Julian, tell them what you did, right? Me thinking it's a good thing when actually there's a curiosity around it, which in some ways wasn't awful, but it wasn't what I thought it was, right? That whole thing, the life chances that had now gone up 10 or 20 times was because of entrepreneurship, was because of an accidental entrepreneurial journey, which taught me resilience, which taught me a work ethic, which taught me lifelong learning, which boosted my confidence from being a child who was bullied, coming from a household of domestic violence, blah, 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 right? All the saddest stories that every entrepreneur's come with, right? I had it too, it's shared. I guess the thing for me was that entrepreneurship helped to unlock that potential that I had. It helped to build the confidence. The only trouble with all of that, because people could say, well, that's great for you. And you're right, it was great for me, as one individual. But I thought, what about everyone else? What's going to happen to everyone else, right? And really, it wasn't so much the concern for me. It was by this time, and this was another thing that compelled me, was as my daughter grew up as a child, she would play in my home office. So she'd have her playthings, and back then we used Skype. So when the Skype would ring, she would know to be quiet and stuff like that, right? And then after a couple of years, we had a little barbecue at home, and so it was family and friends there. And then she comes to the garden with 7 or 8 of her cousins, and she says, so they're all like 7, 8 years old. And she says, right, everyone, we've bought stuff for you to buy. We've made stuff for you to buy. And if you don't have any money, we've made you credit cards too. And she proceeded to go around and give everyone these make-believe credit cards, right? And then they'd come out with the pictures and the stuff that they'd made. And people looked at me like, what are you teaching this poor child, right? Teaching her all this business stuff. And the irony of it was, I hadn't taught her a thing. I hadn't talked to her about entrepreneurship or business at all, right? But she had picked it up from watching me, right? Which again is very normal. Children learn from their parents and they role model, right? And then once they role model, they express that in a play format, right? So that's what, as far as they were concerned, they were just playing. They were playing at being business people and entrepreneurs, right? But what I realized, I looked at that and I thought, wow. So you've managed to convince 7 or 8 of your cousins to go away and do this thing. That's leadership skills. You've put them together in a team. You've created some, a fake credit card. That's some financial literacy there for. You've created some products. You've done all the things that an entrepreneur should do. And you've come out to a group of adults, right? And just proclaimed that we're doing this thing. And so I thought, that's great for my daughter. It's amazing for my daughter. She's now 15, and like her confidence is like galactic, on galactic levels, right? But then I thought, but what about her friends and her cousins? What about everyone else? Because I then realized that the way in which we develop as humans is societal. So you might be confident, but if you are in a group of people that knock your confidence or are going down a particular path, that's going to influence you, right? We know it. So I thought, I don't want my daughter to be the same outlier that I was, right? But what it proved was that by me doing nothing and simply just being who I was, her being around me, she pretty much learned entrepreneurship as a child. And if you speak to anyone in education, they'll tell you that a child can learn multiple languages and musical instruments by the time they're 7. you can learn entrepreneurship if you can learn Mandarin by 7, right? So for me, that was the thing, that was the experience. And my wife was a professional in early years, so she was able to unpack some of this for me. And that was the experience with my daughter that unlocked the idea of being able to teach entrepreneurship to children.
That speaks to the importance of environment, because when you talk about you take it back a little bit, actually talking about the prep school, when you said the 10,000 or private school, something like that, I didn't even know that. I did not, and 25,000 public.
Correct.
I didn't know it was that close, because to me growing up here, it seems like I knew of one private school.
Right.
I knew loads of public schools. I didn't know of that many.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting. But it speaks to the importance of environment. So in the UK right now, there are massive wealth inequalities, and they've been increasing in recent years for whatever reason or whatnot. But the people who do well tend to do well more often than not, because social mobility doesn't happen as often as it should happen. But the people who tend to do well tend to come from certain backgrounds. They probably go to maybe some of these schools or come from very successful families already, and then they can, and they're young, they can say, like, for example, your daughter, how she's modelled you without you even having to teach her. If you've grown up in a family where you've got successful parents and whatnot, you'll just model them without them having to tell you anything. And over time, you just pick up the skills that you need to be able to become successful. And it speaks to the importance of the environments that we immerse ourselves in, the environments that we create, and maybe how we should be a bit more intentional about the environments that people that we're around, the environments that we're in. In order to try and drive some change in our own lives and to be successful.
So what we're trying to do with Ultra Education is to engineer that environment. So we're trying to engineer an environment where children can learn in a way which meets the most optimal framework for education. And I'll give you a practical example, because that sounds quite etheric. When we were running some of our first clubs, it was in a school in Harleston, and I was waiting outside because one of the parents was lost, so I was trying to direct them. And then as all the kids went in, we had 4 of our facilitators in the room, and one of the parents, a dad, as we were looking into the room, he said to me, Julian, what's your secret? What's your magic, in terms of what you're doing here? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm looking at my son, and he's sitting there fully attentive, and he never does that in school. He said, what's the secret sauce to what you're doing? And I said to him, you know what? I said, there is no secret sauce. It is a 1-to-5 teacher-student ratio. That was it. So in a school, there's 1 teacher to 30 students, right? Anyone can tell you with any level of common sense that that's too many students for 1 teacher to effectively get, not even, because in school it's just about knowledge transfer, right? Has knowledge transfer happened? Yeah. For me, I'm like, okay, knowledge transfer is great, but I can just Google that. So for what we want to do, I knew that it was about the person and the individual. Entrepreneurship is very much a personal development journey as well. So I thought, well, we can't do that. I can't have 1 facilitator to be able to do that with 30 kids. So what we're going to do, we'll have 1 facilitator to 5 kids. And that was max. Sometimes it would be less than that. Sometimes it would be 1-to-1. So we had 20 kids in that room, and we had 4 or 5 facilitators, yeah? And I said to him, that's probably the first time your son has had that much face time with a teacher. And he looked at me and said, yeah, that's right. I said, kids love attention, right? They love talking. And especially if you ask a kid, if you ask even an adult, what are your hobbies? What do you love doing? What are you really interested? What are you passionate about? People will talk for days, much less a 10-year-old child, right? And chances are they've not been asked that before. So I said to him, that's why your child's engaged, because we define an entrepreneur as someone who does what they love and they make money from it. So our job, when the child first comes into our learning environment, is to ask them, what do you love doing? What are you passionate about? What do you do without your parents having to tell you to do, right? And they light up. You can see it, and we've seen it so many times. The kids light up. I like pets, I like food, I like sleeping, I like football, I like PlayStation, right? And then what we do is we then say, oh, okay, so and this was like pre-KSI and, you know, the whole YouTube gaming thing. So I would then say to kids, you do know that you could kind of do content on YouTube, reviewing games, and then maybe get sponsors to pay for it. Wow, we didn't realize that. And I remember there's one workshop we did where the parents were in the room and I did this thing. I said, so what do you love doing, right? And one of the kids said, I love watching films. And the parents were looking at me like, yeah, turn that into a business, Mr. Julian, entrepreneur. And I said, do you know what the job title is for someone who reviews films? And one of the teenagers said, yeah, a film critic. And I said, well, there are film critics on YouTube right now and bloggers on the internet right now who are getting paid a lot of money to review films, right? And you can see the parents like, damn, there's business behind everything, right? But it just so happens, and it's completely accidental, that there is business behind everything. Entrepreneurship and business drives everything around the world. You know, they say money makes the world go round. Well, entrepreneurs make money go round, right? So for us, we know there is no child who doesn't want a bit of extra pocket money, right? Who doesn't want some money to buy some Jordans, to buy, you know, that PlayStation game that their parent doesn't want them to buy some Fortnite credits, whatever it was and whatever it is. So, and also the thing is that kids understand money. They do get that money is a valuable thing and that money can help them to do stuff. They get it, right? And to the sharpest extent, kids, unfortunately, understand the difficulties that money can bring within a low-income household. They see it, right? So when we then say, do you realize that you can do what you love and make money from it? And we show them practically how that happens, they're now unlocked. And so that environment, so we've created that environment where they can do a couple of things, where we will listen to whatever you have to say, right? We're not going to rubbish it or diminish it. We will then help you to practically, step by step, do something with that idea, no matter how big or small, right? And we will give you the language to be able to articulate that with everyone else. I remember there was a student who came to us and we said, what do you want to do? I want to create a rocket ship company, right? Because he had seen what Elon Musk had done with SpaceX. So I said to the facilitator, so this was actually a feedback session that the facilitators had given to me. They said, Julian, one of the kids wants to have a rocket ship company. What am I going to do with that, right? And I said, it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that we teach him the mechanics of what goes behind a rocket ship company. Because none of the kids that are starting businesses now, the chances of them having that business in 5 years' time is minimal. That's not the point. We're not trying to turn them into Richard Branson's today. What we're trying to do is teach them the mechanics of business, because we know that those mechanics, they can carry them into another experience or into another job or whatever it might be, right? So I said, what you do, you go back and you say to him, what's going to be the name of your rocket ship company? Let's draw the logo. Who's going to, what's a rocket ship going to carry? Is it going to help put satellites up? Is it going to transport stuff? Is it going to take astronauts? How much do people pay for rocket ship services, right? Who are the competition? And you just go through all of that, just innocently, as if it's really going to happen, right? And this child just went on a madness for the next 3 months on our program, just blowing his mind with the possibilities of this rocket ship company, right? And the parent said to us that that child has never been happier, because they were just allowed to dream, right? I mean, that's what entrepreneurs are told to do, right? We're told to dream. But then when a kid dreams, we shut it down. No, you can't be a dancer. Dancers don't make money. No, you can't have a rocket ship company. You can't be an entrepreneur. You can't be an author. You can't get into tech. That's what adults typically do. Parents and teachers, we shut kids down, right? And we confine them to what we think they're capable of, or what we think we're capable of. Right? So if we're not capable of becoming a speaker or an author, we're not going to empower a child to do that because we don't think we can do it, right? So again, we wanted to create an environment that just didn't have any of those controls in place so that kids could just do what entrepreneurs are told to do, which is to dream.
I love that, man. That's so sick. I know you mentioned that most entrepreneurs don't necessarily most entrepreneurs don't necessarily go on to be successful in, I've forgotten the exact numbers, but most entrepreneurs fail within X amount of years or whatnot, most startups, as an adult, let alone as a child or still trying to navigate and find their way and that kind of thing. But with all of the young people and children that you worked with, have you got any specific like success stories that come to mind of some children that maybe have gone through a particular program, or you or your facilitators are mentored and they've gone on to be successful in whatever endeavor they've got into?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can give you 2 or 3 examples. We had, we've got countless actually, but 2 really good examples. We've got a girl called Lauren, who wrote a book called The Power of an African Girl. She's from a Cape Verdean background. She wrote the book over lockdown. The family went through a lot of upheaval in that time. And Lauren, who was 8 or 9 at the time, wanted to share her experience because, in her words, she said she wanted other little girls who were going through tough times to feel okay. And you just think, for a child to say that is very compelling, right? And she wanted to celebrate the strength of her mother, right? Okay, cool. Sounds like a nice, cute story, except that she then gets published in Waterstones, right? The book starts to do very, very well. They then realise that she's the youngest Cape Verdean author in the country. So the whole Cape Verdean community comes together. The school now is on board. They do this massive celebratory event. The book now gets published into Portuguese. She gets awarded, recognition from the local mayor, and so on, right? I went to one of her events, and I was on the panel. And when we opened up for Q&A, I was sitting next to Lauren, and Lauren, maybe 10 or 11 now, there was a 6-year-old girl who took the mic, like tiny little girl, took the mic and she walked up and she said, "Lauren, I want to write books just like you." Oh. And I looked at that and I thought, yeah. My mind blew, because I thought, now what's happening is, instead of role modeling being adult to child, role modeling was now happening child to child. And that is way more powerful, right? Another example, young man called Talha, who just had an eye for photography, right? He went on to win, he's won about 3 or 4 awards. He won the Saatchi Gallery Award earlier on in the year. Again, he was awarded by his local mayor. He's been featured in a lot of local and national press. He's a finalist now for another competition. And if you look at his work is stunning. I mean, he again is like 10, 11 years old, but his work is comparable to that of an adult professional photographer. And, he's currently being mentored by an adult professional photographer who, says that he's just got this talent. It's just something, it's like he's born with it, right? And so he is now helping us to, we have a newly kind of spun out platform called Yo Buddy, Youth Business Directory. It's like Amazon, but just for kids' businesses. So we've got about 100 sellers on there, about 300 products. So all of the kids that over the years who've been producing their products and services, they all put it into one place. Challenge was, a lot of the product photography wasn't great. But now we've got this 11-year-old photographer who can go knowledge share with all of the other young entrepreneurs to help them improve their product photography, right? So you're talking about skills upon skills upon skills. You're talking about peer learning here. And then, last one, we had 2 kids, one called Marcus, who's got a Caribbean treats thing called MJ's Treats. He's won West London Young Entrepreneur of the Year 2 years in a row now. And it's like Caribbean inspired treats, makes it with his family, really inspiring young man. He was featured on a Virgin Media campaign when they were doing some work around organizations that were empowering communities throughout COVID. And when he first started during lockdown, one of the facilitators said that when he first started, whenever he was asked a question, he would always look to the side of the camera. He would always look to the side to ask mum, get approval from mum. And then at the end of the program, when he went to deliver his final presentation, he didn't look at mum once, right? He just owned that space himself. When he went to do the Virgin promo, I remember, and I mean, I was here and mum was on the other side. There was like 3 cameras, 10 lights, 20 microphones, right? Marcus is like this little, 9-year-old, and he's sitting on this stool, and he's got like the sound man, he's got the director, he's got the interviewer, all these things staring at him. And Marcus just sat up and he just delivered like he'd done it 100 times. And me and the mum were just like tearful, like, wow. I mean, I know adults that couldn't do that. That would be super intimidated by that experience. Marcus, 10 years old, was like, nah, this is cool. Like, I know what to do now, And so, I could go on and on and on. But I think the important thing is that we even, we don't know where it leads to, right? So the kids that have been successful, and again, there were so many more, it's what we realize we're doing is creating possibilities.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. People say we're creating young entrepreneurs. That is true. That's the mechanical term for it. But actually, we're unlocking their potential, which creates possibilities, right? Because we know talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. And I've always said that if you can't access opportunity, you should be able to create your own opportunity, right? Because if there are barriers and opportunities aren't going to come your way, create your own opportunities. And that's what these kids have been doing. They've been creating their opportunities. But it's just by starting something. When Lauren wrote the book, she didn't know she was the youngest Cape Verdean author in the country. When Talha first started photography, he didn't know he was going to win a Saatchi Gallery Award. When Marcus and Mia started doing their thing, they didn't realise they were going to win a West London Business Award. And, be on stage with like 200 people looking at. They didn't know all of this stuff was going to happen, right? But what it does do is when we talk about building confidence, right, and building self-esteem, imagine having that story and you're not even a teenager yet, right? Imagine the possibilities of what could happen when you're, a teenager, 20s, 30s. It's for us, it's mind-blowing.
That's what happens when you're allowed to dream, isn't it? When your dreams aren't necessarily, when they aren't crushed or taken away from you or quenched over time. When entrepreneurs, when we go into entrepreneurship, we do it because you have a dream, you have a hope. You have a hope that one day this thing that you've started is going to become whatever you've got envisioned in your head, that you're going to be able to drive whatever change in your life, your industry, whatever. You do it because you have that hope and you believe it's going to happen. And over time, a lot of people, when you're younger as well, like you said, maybe parents and other people, and it comes from a place of love because they feel that the best thing would be for you to go and do this and do that, because that's the safest path and all that kind of thing. And over time, that hope, it just gets quenched. It gets quenched bit by bit until you get to your adulthood and you're just doing something. You don't necessarily love what you're doing. You're doing it because it's what you're supposed to do or whatever. You don't dream anymore. You don't have any more hope. But then those examples you shared are like very tangible as to like when you just allow them to just like, you want to be a rocket ship engineer? Cool. Let's go and work on it. You want to be a photographer? Cool. Let's work on it. Something that a lot of, I think when you're older as well, yeah, and something I've suffered with when you get a bit older and you want to start a business, you want to start something, you have a massive vision as to where you want it to go to. And then you get paralyzed by inaction, by looking at how big the thing is and looking at where you are now. I'm like, where the hell do I even start? But with these kids, you're saying he didn't know he was going to be win that Saatchi or be in a Saatchi or whatever. They didn't know that she was going to be the youngest Cape Verdean author or whatever. I like writing. I want to do this. Let's do it. Step by step. Little by little. Let me just do what I love. And then if that happens, great. Of course, you have your vision, but if it happens, yes. If not, I'm doing what I love. And I'm happy with that. I'm good with that. With you, I want to take it a little bit back. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times your entrepreneurial journey has been like a succession of different accidents. And that's how you've ended up where you are now. What was how did you get into it in the first place? And what was maybe that first accident you feel that sort of set you on the trajectory you're on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first accident was the first business that I set up with my girlfriend when I was 18 and some friends of ours. And it was a fashion company. We were watching a music video. I think it was TLC. Left Eye was wearing this spray painted dungaree. And, I just quipped to my girlfriend, like, how much would it cost for you to make that? She was like, it's fabric, some spray paint, maybe 20 quid. And then I had a light bulb moment. I thought, well, if you could make that for 20 quid, I could sell it for 100 because you can't find it, right? And that was the genesis to a fashion company she would design. She taught my friends and I how to cut fabric and to sew. We, you know, in my friend's 1-bedroom flat in Stonebridge, we had about 6 sewing machines, overlockers, fabric and patterns all over the place. And yeah, we had a fashion company and the fashion company, and it made sense because it was aligned to a music collective that we had. So, you know, we would all do music and we could look fresh and, you know, we could make some money selling the clothes that we made. So it was, you know, that whole entrepreneurial element of the hip hop culture, we stumbled upon it. We were able to action it because of the skill set that my girlfriend had. And we knew it would solve a problem for us, but it would also solve a problem for other young people out there as well, right? You could buy, you know, unique custom-made clothes that you couldn't find anywhere else. And so for me, that was like saying, it was my first experience of making money. Didn't have a job before that, but it closed the entrepreneurial loop whereby you were inspired by something, you saw a problem that you could solve, you then solved it, and you could repeat that process, right? So once I had done that, I knew I had the capability of starting a business based on an idea. I knew I could do it. I knew I could do all elements of it. It would be different for different types of businesses. And I then went on a journey of trying my hand at almost, I always joke to people, I've tried almost every business you can imagine, right? Like, there are businesses that I've tried that I've even forgotten about, right? And it's because no one had told me that you shouldn't just chase the money. You shouldn't just do a business because you think it makes money, right? So at the time, as a young man, I was going into businesses because I just thought there was money at the end of it. I had no experience. I had no insight. I had no passion for this particular thing. You know, I was doing everything, man. I was, you know, the most comical one was thinking I was going to be like I was going to buy and sell cars. I was going to flip cars, right? And I mean, I knew nothing about cars, right? I could barely change the oil in my own car. And my friend and I, we managed to make some money from a previous business. We went up to the Northampton auctions, didn't know what we were doing, like in an auction, right? Like, it sold a scene, innit? So you could be buying a complete lemon. You have no idea. Unless you're supposed to be a mechanic to go up there and, you know, mechanics just listen to the engine. They know if it's done or not. We hadn't had a clue. So me and my friend went up there, bought these 2 cars. We thought we were the man. Literally, as we were driving down the M1, one of the cars just died on us on the road. And we just had to leave it there. Right? And I sat there thinking, we know nothing about what we're doing here. We know nothing about it, right? And, you know, there's like, we did that a number of times, right? Until I realized that actually the businesses and the entrepreneurs that do well at the startup stage, they have an insight into what they're doing. They have a passion for it. And then along came the digital marketing element, and that became a success because it was something that I was genuinely interested in and passionate about. And it was that business that taught me that doing what you love was a critical and crucial component to starting a business. No one had told me that before.
A lot of our audience that listen to this podcast, they're going to be people, a mixture of people, maybe some corporate professionals who may be interested in going to entrepreneurship later on, maybe some entrepreneurs. A lot of them are going to have some kind of a social thread, though, behind them as a person or the work that they do. For yourself, when you made that transition from I know you've run businesses and worked as well, it's been a bit of both, but when you made the transition from working in the city and making decent wages into entrepreneurship, and then also the transition from, I don't know the exact timeline, but I'm guessing it was a digital marketing, then from there was it into the Ultra.
Yeah.
So those 2 transitions I'm interested in. One, from the work into the marketing or a business world on that side. What was your situation at that point in time? As in, like, were you married and did you have children? And the transition, how was that transition period? Would you go back and change anything if you were to do that again? And then after that, the transition from that into the Ultra, and then 2, different businesses, but the Ultra's got the more of the social thread behind it. With the Ultra, compared to other things you've done in the past, how do you approach it differently? Do you run it differently? Like, what's the difference there?
Yeah, great question, man. You should do this for a living. The first transition bit, I mean, that was it was a good question, because I think it's something that is a massive challenge for people that want to go from a safe, secure, particularly corporate job into doing their own thing, right? So this is my experience of that. Myself, my two colleagues, we were all in some form of corporate. Two of us were in investment banking. My other colleague was already working for a digital agency that was just about to be acquired by Google at the time, actually. And so on the face of it, no reason for us to leave. Like on an economic level, we were cool, right? But from an ambition standpoint, we weren't cool, right? So when so first of all, we ran the agency on evenings and weekends. So the term side hustle wasn't out there, right? But we were 5 to 9ers, yeah. And we would pick up some clients. I remember taking calls in the broom cupboard, and just the typical stuff, right? And I became so good at my job, or I deliberately became as efficient as I could in my job, so that I could work on my own business at the same time, right? But when it came to crunch point, what I was trying to do in that side hustle stage, in that 5 to 9 and weekend stage, what I was trying to do was trying to create enough revenue from the side hustle business so that we would meet our outgoings and we would just step neatly from one level of revenue from our jobs into the level of revenue in the business, right? That didn't happen. We couldn't on a part-time basis get the revenue of the business high enough. It got to a point where we knew we had to make the leap. We knew we had to put in more hours, right? And so we went off to raise some money. And at the point where I had to make the decision as to whether or not we were going to trigger this raise, the guy who was helping us to do the raise, because he knew this was the critical point. This was the point where, it was a point of no return, right? He said to me, if you believe in what you're about to do, if you believe that you've got the capability to make this digital agency work, then do the raise. If you don't think you have the ability and you don't fully believe in it, you don't have to tell me, but if you don't fully believe in it, he said, don't do it. And that's all I had to hear. Because I fully believed in it, I was, I knew. He was essentially saying that, the way in which you are going to de-risk this raise is based on whether or not you think you're capable of making the business a success. And I knew I had the capability, right? And so we had to, and that was the thing, that capability was the thing that gave me the leap of faith that I needed, right? Because I knew I could work hard enough. I knew that I was in a growing market. I knew that there was demand because we were already securing clients and stuff, but we just couldn't bring up the revenue high enough, right? So if we raised some money, took that leap, there was, it was risk capital. Could we work hard enough? Could we exercise our capability to make it work, right? And so, we managed to do that. It wasn't all smooth sailing because the 2008 credit crunch happened literally 2 years after we started. Yes, I was with my now wife. Our first daughter was on the way. And so stakes were high, right? It wasn't a play thing anymore, right? I had to get this right. So at that time, I was going from a safe, secure environment to this digital entrepreneur thing where we're the only black guys kind of doing it. There wasn't loads of black people doing it. So there were going to be barriers, right? So we were up against it. It wasn't like, something that we were stepping into that was super favorable for us. But against all of that, two things. I loved what we were doing. I genuinely had a passion for it. And I was just interested in it, really interested in it. And I knew I was capable. I knew that professionally we were capable enough of running a business, right? So I guess for people that are listening who are in that transitionary period, and I speak to people like that all the time, the question you've got to ask yourself is, do you think you have the capability? Because it's not just about the passion, right? Because you can be passionate about something and not be good at it. Like I used to be a passionate rapper. I wasn't very good, right? Like I know loads of passionate rappers that aren't very good, right? I know loads of passionate beat makers and they're not that good, right? So if you're passionate about something, we're not very good. I knew I was really good at it. I just knew I was, because people were already paying us. So are you capable? Are you good enough to be able to produce something that people will pay for repeatedly, right? First question. And then, are you in love with it? Because the being in love with it bit isn't just for you. It's important for you because, like yourself, Tevin, you've explained all of the difficulties it takes to get to where you are, but because you have found a purpose in what you're doing, that is more important than the difficulty. If you didn't have that, the difficulty would make you say, it's not worth it, I'm going to stop, right? And so for people that want to start something, it will be difficult, more difficult than you think, right? But if you are in love with it, or if it's purpose-driven, if you're driven to do it, then that will enable you to get over all of the difficulties, right? But then more commercially, if you are really passionate about it, you'll just deliver a better product or service, like one that people will feel the passion that you've got for whatever it is you're delivering, and that looks like value, and that value is what will give it a monetary exchange with that customer or client, right? But there will be a point where you will have to face an unknown quantity, right? You will probably have to take a leap of faith at some point. I would love to tell you that you would just step from your job into a nice, entrepreneurial thing. Even if you've raised £1 million, whatever it is you've raised 100 grand, whatever it is, right? If it's risk capital, you've got to pay it back, right? Even if it's a grant and you've not had the experience of managing money of that amount, you could waste the money and you may not be able to get it back again, right? So, again, it's not just a financial thing. Oh, I've raised money to go off and do it, right? You've got to have the capability and the passion. If you've got those two things, then leave your job, man. Tell your boss later. But yeah, and I don't want to sound irresponsible with the advice. Like, there's also comfort levels. The last thing I would say, some entrepreneurs would say, just being soft on people, but there is a comfort level thing, meaning you do have to be able to sleep at night with your decision. Like, don't let people tell you to do something that you're not comfortable with. Like, don't let the goal-getting entrepreneur tell you, just leave your job, man. What are you dealing with? Just forget your boss. Do this thing, you'll be fine. And then you do it on someone else's say-so. Don't do that either. Do you know what I mean? Because you're the one that's got to live with it. You're the one that's got to sleep at night, which is to some degree why, inspiration, even though I don't like inspiration and motivation, it can help to give you the comfort that or the courage you need, right, to take that next step. And more practically than kind of inspiration and motivation, that's why it's good to have like mentors and coaches, because they can help you to think about how you can become more comfortable. Because a lot of the stuff you need to do, you don't need to do it tomorrow morning. A lot of companies are cool with people having a side hustle, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? So there are more ways today to de-risk what you're doing. The only thing I would say is that start doing some version of what it is you want to do, right? And this is what we say with the kids, right? If you want to, kids will come to us, I want to start a fashion company. I want to have caps, hoodies, trackies, ballies, everything, right? We're like, okay, just start with one, right? Which one do you like the most, right? I like ballies though. It's okay, maybe you shouldn't start with ballies. Maybe you start with, what do you want to start? We start with one thing first and action that one thing. Do you know what I mean? Because you can chip away at it. You don't need to think, okay, I need to leave my job and then do everything at once. Nah, you can do some version of it, right? Before you do like the full idea.
Yeah. And then that approaching the Ultra Education, and then against the digital marketing?
Yeah.
Against digital marketing and maybe some other ventures you've done in the past as well. How does it differ? Because the Ultra is slightly different in the sense that, of course, it's a CIC, I think, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so obviously it's a social company, but you still got to make money. But then you've got a strong social purpose behind what you're doing. How do you balance that? And then do you approach it differently to other things you worked on in the past?
Yeah, so it is night and day. What I'm doing with Ultra Education, the challenge for me is that I'm not a social entrepreneur. And, you know, I'm saying that all my funders and backers and sponsors are going to be like, I'm not working with this guy anymore, right? Like what? What did he just say? But no, I'm an entrepreneur that has discovered a social purpose. There's a difference, right? Meaning that actually the things that have made Ultra Education successful are because I'm an entrepreneur first, right? So it means that, you know, I look at revenue models. I look at how we're going to sustain ourselves. You know, I look at all of the things which in the social sector is challenging for most people, right? The marketing of it and all, you know, I bring that enterprise experience to the social sector, which is the reason why in the time that we've existed, you know, just as humbly as I can state it, we've created more impact and we've created more impact than organizations that have been around like, you know, decades longer than us. And it's not because we are better at social impact, it's because we are better at entrepreneurship. And it's not so much better, that's just our background. Do you see what I mean? We have a background in entrepreneurship. So we can bring that to social impact. So I think mostly in the social sector, people are impact, they come at it as an impact person, and then they build up their enterprise skill set. I came at it with an enterprise skill set and I'm building up my social impact assets and skill sets, right? Because I'm still learning the verbiage that is being used in the social sector. You know, there's, in terms of impact, right? The impact we've created has not been because I'm a super smart impact guy. It's not. It's just so happens that entrepreneurship is a great vehicle for impact. I didn't know that. I had no idea. That's why I was saying to you that when we were running our clubs, someone had to tell me we were creating social impact. I had no idea what that even meant. So I can't take credit for the impact of it, if you know what I mean. Yeah. That was an accident. It just so happened that entrepreneurship is a great vehicle for social impact. And it just so happened that I have an entrepreneurial journey that's credible, that I can then add some value. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. There's a lot of just so happens there, right? Now, when you zoom out, those just so happens really is down to that's purpose. That's why I say, you know, you can only just so happens for so many times until you realize that was meant to happen. I was meant to do that. That was my purpose. And I say to my advisors that what Ultra Education has done for me personally, not in terms of money, but in terms of my growth and my fulfillment as a human, far outweighs by light years anything I've done before, right? Because all of the stuff I'd done before, there's no impact in it. Yeah, if we help a business do well, there's a feel-good factor, you high five, but it's not that special. You just help someone make more profit to go and buy another Rolex, right? That's not super, do you know what I mean? Fulfilling, right? The reason why teachers go into that sector, the reason why youth workers go into the sector is because when you see the light bulb moment happen with a child or a young person, when you know you've helped a family, when you know you've helped a young person turn the corner, there is very few things in life that matches how amazing that feels. Very few things in life, right? The thing that I wanted to do, because of the tech background, and in tech, people keep talking about how do you scale? How do you repeat that? So when I came into the social sector, I thought, well, I've done it. I could do it. My wife can do it. But can we scale it? Can we get other people to do it? Then we were able to train other facilitators that could do it. Some could even do it better than we could, right? And then I was thinking, okay, we've seen 100 kids this week. How can we see 1,000? How can we see 2? We've got 25 kids that have come to the fair. How can we make it 50? How can we make it 100? How can we make it 150? In my mind, I'm always thinking about scale, right? And again, that's a difference. So usually what would happen in the social sector, if you are an organisation based in Brent, which we are, it is the norm, it is the accepted norm that if you're based in Brent, you just serve the community in Brent. No one told me that. I was serving people from Barnsley to Brighton, right? If a family called me up there was a family in, where was it? it was like somewhere like Hull, right? Said, can you help my son start his business? I'm like, yeah, sure. No one would and other social enterprise might have said, sorry, our funding is only for Brent. I didn't know that's what you're supposed to say, right? So I'm helping everyone, right? And for me, in the rearview mirror, that's a restriction to the social sector. You shouldn't do that. And it's dictated by funding because, funders will ring fence. You can only work with 12 to 16-year-olds and it can only be in Brent. So what about the kids in Harrow and the ones in Barnet and blah, 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 right? So for that reason, we'd still take the funding, but we would create other revenue streams and other models that allowed us to serve communities unrestricted. We didn't have to ask anyone because we could make money doing other things, right? Consultancy, contracts, delivering workshops, delivering talks, blah, 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 partnership stuff, right? Which were unrestricted, which meant that we could just deliver the impact wherever we saw it. I didn't come into this thinking borough specific. Do you see what I mean? And even to this day, that's still something that I have to unpick with people. People were like, oh, you're West London based. Yeah, we're based there. But that's like saying Amazon is based in America, so they only deal with America. You wouldn't say Amazon just serves America, would you? So why does Ultra only have to serve Brent? Do you see what I mean? Yeah. But that's the thinking of the social sector, right? So you ask what are the differences, right? And so these are some of the differences. The mindset in the social sector is different to the mindset in the commercial sector. I know I'm stating the obvious, but there are pros and cons to both, right? In the social sector, the thinking is very local. And to some degree, sometimes it needs to be. But there is very little thinking about how to scale and how to become self-sufficient, right? And that's because it is tough, right? Because you're adopting a model that someone's given you. You're saying, okay, as a charity, as a CIC, this is how you operate. I didn't come into it like that. I came into it like, this is how I want to operate. Is there a model that can fit how I want to operate, right? In the commercial sector, very good at scaling, very good at making money, but then I guess it's the reason why the planet's in the mess it's in, right? Because the commercial sector has no conscience, right? And the more people make money, the more they just want to make money, and they might break off some of that to give to a little initiative here or there, but they don't really care about it. So it's kind of the idea of a social enterprise is supposed to be a mix of both, right? It's supposed to be part charity, part commercial organization, right? Challenge with that is that it's difficult to be able to traverse both mindsets. It's difficult, right? I'm not saying it's impossible. There are people that do a great job of it, but from what I've seen, it's difficult to be a successful enterprise, purely commercial, and then create loads of impacts at the same time. It's not an easy thing to do. The organizations that seem to have done it really well are organizations which have a more well-worn commercial model, right? Like a coffee shop, for example, right? And then they might employ ex-offenders, right? So it's a coffee shop model. Everyone knows a coffee shop. Everyone knows coffee shops can do well, blah, blah, blah. The only difference is the impact bit is you're employing ex-offenders, right? The models like that tend to work quite well. Whereas service-led models, which are like programs and workshops, the kind of stuff that Ultra does, it's trickier. It's trickier to make that model work. And the thing that makes my heart sink is there was a young man who came into our studios at Take Your Shot about 2 weeks ago. And the individual there who brought him in introduced me. And I said to him, we were talking about just, kicking game on the whole working with young people thing. And then he said to me, yeah, but, you can only do so much based on the funding. And I thought, you see what I mean? Your entire narrative is based on funding. So you want to do more, but you can't because of funding. No. Think more broadly than that. That's what I mean. You're thinking too social. Thinking social impact means that you only think you can do something if you get funding. Thinking entrepreneurially, you think you can do anything.
You got to find your opportunity.
You got to find the opportunities, right? And so that's, so to answer your question, they're light years apart. I've not found, I think you need to have a hybrid model, but even that hybrid model, I've not found the perfect iteration of that yet. But that's kind of what I'm working towards.
When you're talking, it reminds me of this book. It got me thinking of this book, The E-Myth. I don't know if you read it or heard
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, where it's like, I read it so long ago, so I'm going to, because you've got particular terms he uses, but basically like approaching businesses like an entrepreneur and not necessarily, obviously he's not talking about social sector now, but that's what's coming to mind because he has like, you got people who start businesses, but they're, I think he calls them technicians. So people who work. So let's say, for example, you open a bakery.
Yep.
And then you're a baker. So cool, I'm a baker. I'll open a bakery. And then in order to scale, you're just doing more work. But there's only so much output. You can work 12 hours, you work 18 hours at some stage, you can't scale past that. And then you don't want to bring other people in. And you don't want, because they're not going to bake the way you bake. So you're approaching it like a worker. But then in order to scale, you need to approach it like an entrepreneur. And that's how you can scale. And then put systems in place so that you can scale and it doesn't require more of your time in order to grow the business. And although slightly different to what you're saying, that's what was coming to mind, like approaching your business or your world like an entrepreneur and not necessarily like a social entrepreneur. You approach it like an entrepreneur and you've got a social impact behind the work and what you're doing. Have you got any particular like books or resources that you would point to that you have had a profound impact on how you work?
So first of all, you're absolutely right in your kind of comparison around how that they approach the kind of way in which business people approach or a worker might approach a business and an entrepreneur. It is very, very similar. That analogy of how I've approached the social sector. In terms of books, it's a really good question. I spent most of the 2000s up until kind of between 2000 and 2010, I read so many books on business, personal development, wealth, all the rest of it. Until I got to a point where I realized they were all saying the same thing. And I'd like to say books like Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, books like that had a profound impact on kind of shifting my mindset around things. Except that in practice, and people are going to hate me for criticizing Think and Grow Rich or Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but in practice, and I can only say it's because they were written before, a number of these issues existed, like, it doesn't work for everybody, right? And more to the point, you can't take one book and think that's going to solve all your problems, right? Because I think that's what a lot of people do. They're like, this book's going to just solve my problems for me, right? I think what you've got to do is take from those books as many as you can, books, audio books, podcasts, and figure out a blueprint for you. Because how Tevin became successful is not going to be how you're going to become successful, right? You have to figure that out for yourself. And that's difficult. It sounds easy, but that's very difficult because no one's taught you how to do that, right? So what we find ourselves doing is listening to the stories of other people, listening to these frameworks and tools and blueprints and trying to piece things together. We try things, fail, try things, win, try things, fail again. I mean, this is exactly what I've done, right? Until I figured out actually what I need to do is do it for myself. No one can give Julian a blueprint for Julian. Only I can do that. But that takes some introspection, which again, people aren't usually taught. It takes a degree of managing your ego. And it takes a self-critical look at what you are good at, what you're not, what your limitations are, etc. And then it takes a review of that on a very regular basis. It's got to be quite fluid, right? So yeah, I guess so in terms of resources, your favorite podcast on business is probably pretty good, right? Whatever that might be, your favorite personal development podcast. I mean, there's so many of them out there. There are lots of really great ones. But again, don't just say because this person did that, that's what I'm going to do. You can't do that, right? You can't wear their size shoes. You've got to find your own, right? You might like the look of them, how they fit, how that person experiences it, but you've got to find the fit for yourself. And that just takes some time to kind of rinse through, but you've got to be okay with doing that. So I guess the greatest resource I could offer to entrepreneurs is just working on yourself, whatever that means for you. For me, that means having a routine. So, before we were recording, you asked me, how many times do I go to the gym? I go to the gym like every day, right? Like 5-6 times a week. And it's not, but I don't go because I'm trying to be hench, or that's not why I go. I go because it gives me the physical outlet I need. It gives me a disconnection from thinking about work. It gives me some quiet time, and physiologically, I just need to pick up heavy things and drop them, right? There's a physiological response that anyone who does any physical activity, whether it's football or running, there's a physiological benefit, right? That you get because the rest of the day I'm sitting down pretty much, right? But I make sure that I protect my sleep. I make sure I get my 8 hours sleep. I don't play with my food. I make sure I eat. I'm always staying hydrated. So those are some basic things. Like level 2 things are, in the last 10 years, I've actively removed stress from my life. Just actively, right? Because stress is the number one killer of many things, right?
Well, what does that look like to you when you say actively remove stress?
Yeah. So if anyone listening, right, gets your notes out on your phone or your pen and paper, you could write down now 10 things that stress you out. We can all do it. The problem is that removing those 10 things requires often a new behavior or some difficult conversations or some discipline in yourself, right? So people might be stressed out at the fact that they don't get enough sleep. Go to bed earlier then. Oh, I try, but I can't lock off. That's behavior. It's not like you're incapable. Do you see what I mean? That's just a change in behavior. Over 60 or 70% of what we do on a daily basis is the same, right? The things we do, it's the same. We do things the same way each day, eat the same things. Do you know what I mean, right? But it may not be serving us. Some of those things might be stressing us out. We might have a relationship with a friend, family member, whoever it might be, who's just always stressing us out, maybe inadvertently, right? Stop taking their calls. Like, put them on pause for a minute. No, for real though. Or, there may be, often it's situations and people and environments, right? You might be in a working environment that stresses you out. You can't leave that working environment immediately, but I know when I was in corporate and I was having a bad time, they were just friends that I'd made in corporate, and we would make that time together in the workplace bearable, right? Like there are ways that you can chip away against the stress. It's not often about just removing it. You can't just remove it altogether, but sometimes you can minimize it. You can chip away against it. But it does take courage often. And that's the thing that is difficult for people, because it's not, when we all say it's not easy to make these behavior changes, but the reason why it takes courage is because you're facing something that is either unknown or something that is difficult or something that you're afraid of, right? The reason why we don't have a difficult conversation with a friend or a family member or a colleague is because you're afraid of the outcome. You're afraid you're going to hurt their feelings. You're afraid it's going to mash up the business. You're afraid it's going to hurt that relationship. But you're already hurting. So what's the difference? Choose your hurt, right? And I'm not trying to make it sound easy. I'm just trying to make it sound like a process that's doable, right? And what I will say to you is that in me doing that, and I've been doing it, I've been chipping away at it for 10 years, right? It means that the energy cost of dealing with stress, I can now put towards other things. Because then when people ask me, Julian, how come you're able to do so much, right? You got gym, you got family, you got time to go on holiday, you're doing podcasts, you're running this business, you got that. How come you're able to do so much? It's not because I've got more time in the day than Beyonce, right? It's not because I'm more capable or special than anyone else, right? Because I genuinely don't think I do. I am. It's because I cut away at stuff that either in terms of physical energy is going to drain me, emotional energy or mental energy is going to drain me. So it means that I've just now given myself 30 or 40% more time or more energy or more space in the day than someone else to be able to do the other things that I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? So now I'm able to see if something is coming down the road, could be anything, something big or small. I know where to place it so it doesn't stress me out, or how to manage it so it doesn't stress me out. You know, so it means that I delegate a lot. I would rather pay someone to do something than me do it if I know it's going to stress me out. Do you see what I mean? Because I know that people will be like, you know, because there's a lot of stuff that I used to do that really was it was below my hourly rate, if you know what I mean, right? You know, I would joke with the family when they'd ask me to do stuff, and I'd be like, do you think Barack would do that? If Barack ain't doing it, I ain't doing it, right? Let's get someone in to do that. Do you know what I mean? Let's get someone in to do that, because if Barack wouldn't do it, we're gonna get someone in, right? And they're like, but you're not Barack. I'm like, I'm trying, right? But the point was, it was just that if you want to do stuff in life, right? There's other stuff you're gonna just have to stop doing. I'm stating the obvious, but there are things which you're just gonna have to stop doing. People you're gonna have to stop engaging with, not altogether, but as much. There are and then there are things you've just got to reframe, right? You know, we can't escape all of the stresses, but we can reframe them. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. And part of that reframing that I've done is when people do come into my space, knowingly or unknowingly, stressing me out about stuff, I reframe it into, okay, how bad is this really? I know it's stressing me, but I've been through worse. So this isn't that bad. Number two, I'm like, do they mean to stress me out? Probably not. So maybe I should just tell them, look, you're stressing me out a little bit, chill out. And then they're like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, boom, boom, bam. Or is there something that they are challenged with, which is just being projected onto me? Do you see what I mean? Yeah. And actually, they just need me as an outlet, because they know that they can let off on me and I'm not going to go hard on them, right? So I'm just a device for them. Do you see what I mean? You can reframe it in ways that don't stress you out anymore. And then that energy that you would have used to be stressed out, you can use to go off and do something more productive.
Yeah, nice. What would you say has been your one, or is there any one major learning that you've had through your entrepreneurial journey?
Okay.
I'm sure there's been a lot.
Yeah. It's something I say all the time, which is to do what you love. And the reason I hesitate is because that phrase is often received in an oversimplified way. But what I can say about doing that is that if you do that, you'll put in the work required because you won't see it as work, right? But on a higher level, and this is the message on our website that I give to parents. I say that, like, if you ask a mum, what do you want for your child, right? Like, if you ask a dad, what do you want for your child? The dad's going to say, I want my child to be successful, right? Typically. If you ask a mum, the mum's going to say, I want my child to be happy, right? Cool. So if you then extrapolate that out into adult life, and you think, all right, cool. We spend 40 to 60 hours a week at work, and a lot of people hate their job. So it's a huge chunk of your life to not like, yeah? And some people are like, no, I don't hate my job, it's all right. That's still a huge chunk of your life to just be all right, right? I'm trying to offer a scenario where that 40 to 60 hours a week you love. That's what I'm trying to propose, right? Because for me, if you love the work you do, your chances of happiness go up, right? Now, happiness isn't just down to your work, right? There's other facets of your life that can make you happy or unhappy, but things bleed into each other, right? If you're unhappy at work, the chances of you being unhappy in other areas of your life are kind of high. If you're unhappy in other areas of your life, the chances of you being unhappy in your work are kind of high, right? Things bleed into each other. We're not just, we're not mechanical in that way. I can't solve your relationship problems and all the rest. I can't do that, right? What I can say is that in your work, whether you're working a job or you are working for yourself, love it. And that might change too. This is the other realization, right? And so I think, this kind of, I say there's levels to it insofar as I loved the work I was doing in the digital agency until I found something I loved more, which was impact. And then I loved delivering the impact until I loved the idea of scaling the impact, right? I now love the idea of scaling the impact. I'm now more in love with making it more sustainable on my own terms without having to ask anyone for anything. I'm in love with that idea now. How can I sustain Ultra on my own? I don't have to ask anyone for nothing, right? That's the next. So it changes, right? What you are in love with doing, it changes, right? And you should allow yourself to, to make that so. But ultimately, I think that going back to this promise that we're given as kids and young people about, go to school, get good grades, work hard, get a good job, do these things and you'll be happy, right? That's the promise that the world gives us. And if we hold on to the happy bit, all I'm saying is that if you do what you love in your work, which takes up a significant part of your life, both in hours and in thinking, we probably think about our work another 40 hours, right? After the actual physical doing of the work. If you love doing it, then yeah, the chances of happiness just go up.
Talking about sustainability, impact, etc. What's next for you and for the Ultra Education Ultra group in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I were to wave a magic wand, in 5 years' time, we'd be a national company. So have a footprint across the UK. There's a number of ways in which we're looking at doing that. Just scaling our schools and club program, potentially through a franchise model, which we've piloted, which has been successful. Using technology, so we've got the YoBuddy platform, YoBuddy e-commerce platform, which is growing in traction all the time. So scaling that gives us a faster ability to scale, and really celebrating the work of our kids, because those stories travel. Those stories give us millions of eyeballs. And so it's about how can we build on what we've done, and then building on it, meaning now in the last few years, we've been in the process of doing the boring stuff, putting the systems and the processes in place so that we can repeat what we've done, right? Being successful at something is only good if you can do it again and again and again, right? And that requires systems, processes, all the grown-up stuff in a business, right? And so for me, that's taking me into more of a leadership space and thinking how to do that. Thinking more deliberately about partnerships, and dare I say, politics and policy, and the macro view of the world and where all of that's headed. So I think really we have proven that entrepreneurship can help move the needle on the development of children and young people. Now what we want to do is to scale that, make it nationwide, and make it worldwide.
That's sick. That's so good, man. And as we prepare to wrap up, final question we always end with, I feel like you've answered it already, but let me ask you may want to frame it slightly differently. So 1,000 Voices, we're interviewing or speaking to 1,000 Black British social entrepreneurs, change makers, people who are essentially driving change in their lives or in the communities that they work within. what advice would you give to another person who maybe wants to create the same sort of impact that you're doing, maybe in a similar industry, maybe in another industry, but what kind of advice would you give to someone like that? Yeah. What would you...
Yeah, I guess practically I would say to get some kind of coach or mentor that has walked the path you're about to walk. And the reason I say who has walked the path you're about to walk is there are, for me, two types of mentors, right? There's the mentor who is like the old wise sage, right? Who may be much older than you, a lot more experienced than you. And there's a lot of value in that. And then there's like a more big brother type mentor, big brother, big sister type mentor who may only be just a few years ahead of you because they can give you very practical approaches and tactics that you can employ today in your business, very kind of hands-on stuff, right? Whereas the old wise sage can give you very kind of macro, deep, learnings and if you can couple that with the actionable tactical stuff from the big brother, big sister type mentor, that you should, if you could do that at the beginning, because I didn't have that at the beginning. If you could do that at the beginning, it just means your chances of pain are less, right? And your chances of success are higher. I had mentors. I had great mentors in the past. They just weren't in the industries that I was going into. That was my only misstep. My only misstep was not actually looking for mentors who were actually in the same space as me. They were always doing something slightly different. There was value in it as well, but it just meant that there was a chunk of knowledge that I had to figure out myself. And there's enough smart, successful people in almost any industry you're going to go into today that has done it before, and you can benefit from their insights and their experience. So in my own business, we're doing that very deliberately now, right? So with YoBuddy, I'm speaking to people who have a lot of experience in the e-commerce space, in the marketplace space. And because our events are becoming more and more popular, I'm speaking to people who are specific in events, right? So I'm just being more laser targeted with that approach, and that is the kind of advice that I would give to someone who's starting out. Be really laser focused in approaching the coaches and mentors who are specifically doing or specifically in the place that you'd like to be.
That's it, man. That's it. I think interview done.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me, man.
Thanks for coming down. This was a great conversation,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you coming down and sharing all of those bits of wisdom that you shared with us on your journey as well, man. It's been sick.
Thank you, man. Thanks again for having me. Nice space, man. Really impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're trying, man.
Yeah, man.
To wrap up, if people want to keep up to date with yourself, with the work that you do, how can they best do so?
Yeah, so the website and on socials, we are Ultra.Education. The e-commerce platform is yobuddy.com, yobudi.com. And yeah, you'll find us again across all the socials. Say hi, we'll say hi back. Come down to check us out at our offices at Take a Shot Studios in Wembley Park. We're just here to collaborate, support as many children, young people as we can.
Nice. And then lastly, before we wrap up, have you got any closing words?
Yeah, definitely subscribe to the 1000 Voices podcast. Tevin, you've been doing an amazing job.
I appreciate it.
I know you've got a whole bunch of podcasts under your belt. So, I hope to see you just continuing that. We need voices like yours in this space. And I think what you're doing by amplifying those voices in the way you're doing it's invaluable work. So please don't stop. And yeah, anyone out here listening, please share, this episode, obviously, but but the podcast platform with friends, family, because I think it's really great work.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. So that's that. Thank you for coming down once again. Like Julian said, if you can share, subscribe, it does help. We're on a mission to speak to and interview 1,000 Black British changemakers, shift the dial, put out more positive stories and inspire some people along the way. So if you can please do share, subscribe, leave us a review. That helps a hell of a lot as well. And hopefully we can work towards getting all of these 1,000 inspirational stories out there. But that's that for now. Thank you for coming to the podcast once again, Julian.
Thank you, Tevin.
This is 1,000 Voices, and for now, people, we're out. Cool.
Cool. Wicked,
All right,
man. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you're all good, man.